The evolution of financial systems, old versus new. In this episode, Dr. Jemma Green is joined by Stefan Rust from Truflation for part 2 of the discussion, which includes looking at remote working, AI's energy consumption, changing attitudes towards climate change, and the evolution of blockchain. Stefan explains differing inflation data and how it's used by financial markets, as well as the significance of decentralized applications. There's also plenty of valuable advice for new investors. I'm your co-host Anthony Perl, and whether you're an investor or a startup looking for insights, it's time to get unblocked.
I moved from Australia to Switzerland a year ago, and I spent my life on Zoom calls talking to people in my field and really only seeing them a couple of times a year if I'd travel long distance to get to conference. And to be honest, the thing that I like about living in Switzerland now is that I meet people like you in Zurich a lot every day. And I have to say, I do prefer it. I feel like my life is much more rich from having people that I can actually interact with in person. But equally, I think, COVID showed us that it was a catalyst, I think, for some things that were ripe for change, like acceptance of actually creating online communities and collaborating online in the workforce sense. But also, it used to be that you couldn't get deals signed unless you'd actually gone to eyeball people. But I think that has definitely changed. I think there's lots of amazing things that can come out of this, but there's also things that could be quite concerning. Like, what is the role of human? I think it's a great question, and we certainly don't know all the answers to that. And I think some of it could be great and some of it could be challenging. I mean, not least around energy, which is the topic that I look at in a lot of detail, which is that AI consumes so much energy, which is already, the grids are suffering from massive underinvestment for decades, and a lot of the spare capacity is being taken up by AI now, such that the tech companies' energy consumption has, gone up 50% in the last year, and it's going to go even more, as we know. And that is going to put pressure on electricity prices, which will affect humans. So on the one hand, AI will do stuff for us, but on the other hand, it will actually create more inflationary pressure for some essential services like electricity. I wanted to ask you, Stefan, about who uses the inflation numbers. Like, we know prices are going up, or you said people can access the data. What are the companies that are using your data, and how are inflation numbers used? I think it would be for our listeners to understand that.
So when we first launched, we decided to put everything onto the blockchain. And I didn't know who the customer base was going to be, but I knew one thing, that I would be able to find a customer opportunity and a revenue opportunity with the data that we're doing. I didn't know how yet, but I knew we could do that. And we started off with subscriptions on a website. But the first customer base, totally contrary to what I thought was really going to happen, was actually Wall Street and the city, investment funds, hedge fund managers, family offices, right? Really people that are trying to make sure that they outperform inflation numbers, right? And so where are they putting their investment in? If inflation's at 12%, according to Truflation, at the peak during COVID, it was up at 12%. And so if it's up at 12%, or in the UK, it was up 20%, right? So if you look at those numbers and your investments are returning 6%, you're losing net 6% in the US, or maybe even up to 18% or 12% or 14% in the UK, depending which number you're at. And so they were starting to use the numbers, and what they were trying to do was not only sort of look at their investment portfolios and manage their investment accordingly, but they were also trying to leverage the numbers that we were having to predict where and recalculate and calibrate based on our categories and our high frequency of the data, to recalibrate and try to meet where the BLS and the ONS in the UK were going to come out at. And that would then allow them to make a bet on yield opportunities just before that announcement came out, and then ultimately make a trade that would generate some 20, 30% for them on that trade alone, which would ultimately then extrapolated over the year, would then generate sufficient value for them. That was our first customer base. And that has allowed us to build out a bit of a research arm where we now help the smaller firms for a subscription fee to then get access to our research and our own interpretation calculations that we do associated with our data to map that against the data of the governments so that we can predict where the government's going to come out at. And we do that now with an accuracy of about 99%. So our models are pretty much on spot with being able to predict government numbers. That's one part of the business that's really users of the Truflation data. The other part is really on the blockchain. And so we're now connected to some 20 different layer ones and layer twos, as well as through Chainlink, a number of bridges, so that we can actually distribute our price feeds and indexes through this network onto the various chains. Why is it important on the chains? Because there are a number of application developers on those different blockchains that are looking for new types of products to offer in their services. And those can be prediction markets that sit on the blockchains. They can be perpetual dexes. Those can be liquidity pools, lending protocols, payment systems.
Right. You're going to have to explain some of those things. So what's a perpetual DEX? What's a layer one? What's a layer two?
Okay. Yeah. A layer one blockchain is like Ethereum, a Bitcoin would be unique Solana. Those would be sort of layer one blockchains. Why layer one? Because they write the original code base and they act as the source of truth for anybody that builds on top of those. In order to drive efficiencies in the network in terms of whatever those efficiencies may be, accuracy, speed, whatever you might look for, generally speed, there are level twos that build on top of these level ones. So on top of Bitcoin, you've got a number of level twos, Liquid Network and Lightning. And so there are a number of those on top of the Bitcoin network. On top of Ethereum, you have a number like Optimism. You've got, and all the other ones. On top of Cosmos, you have a whole bunch of other layer twos, from Osmosis to other ones. Anyway, that's sort of the layer one and layer two scenario. And then you have applications that get built on top of those blockchains. Now think about it like this. It's Windows operating system and applications that sit on those. Apple iOS mobile phone, apps that are sitting on top of your iPhone. Android, same thing. Right. Apple, so you got that scenario. Yeah. So they're considered dApps, so decentralized applications that sit on top of the layer ones and layer twos. And those are DEXs. DEXs is a decentralized exchange that offers the ability to perpetually borrow money on an ongoing basis to do trades. So you deposit, let's say $100 in there, and you can borrow against that 100, maybe borrow up to 1,000, so 10x, in order to buy into a unique position. That could be a Bitcoin, that could be a Solana token, that could be a commodity, that could be energy, that could be an index. So ultimately, those are markets that we're looking at and are beginning to be very interested in real world prices, not only consumer prices, but also asset prices. And we've managed to build out this library of consumer prices and asset prices.
Got it. And so when you talk about people, like your products, you started talking about like Wall Street and TradFi, traditional finance, using your services. And now you've just described, if I understand correctly, is like trading on the volatility of some of these asset prices and inflation prices as well. The delta, like day to day from a particular index in and of itself, or the delta between the government numbers and your numbers as well.
And then the delta between the index and the underlying that sits in the index.
Mm-hmm.
But that's exactly right. And like I said really early on in the podcast, where day traders love volatility.
What do you think of volatility?
Yeah, I think volatility is good. It keeps us on our toes.
So we're on our toes this week.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, it's extremely emotional. Let's put it like that. Volatility can give you great highs, but can make you extremely depressed as well. And I think we as humans thrive on, we have to retain emotions. And what's happened in the world, I think today, is it's become too flat. We try to standardize everything. We want to take emotions out of everything. I think that's bad. We have to learn to deal with emotions. And we need, and the only way we learn to deal and manage emotions is by having excitement, disappointments, right? And we need to be able to handle those, right? And anger, frustrations, we need to deal with that. And that's what makes us unique and makes us the survival beast that the human is.
It's that hard part, isn't it? That trying to get that balance between a system that is, as you were talking about earlier on, trying to find a consistent level with inflation on one hand, and on the other hand, the volatility, which is a natural human element, right? That's always going to be, and it's how we see things. And then you've got those cyclical elements, particularly politically, right? That also happens in a cyclical way. So coping with all of those things.
And I know financial investors love consistency, right? But actually they're ruining the world, I think, because there's nothing consistent in the world. We're just not consistent beasts, right? The geopolitical situation is a whole nother animal that we need to come to terms with. I mean, we just need to. And I don't know, that's a real big challenge. And I don't have an answer to that other than, we need to have an environment that allows us to not just coexist, but integrate. And you don't force integration. You have to entice integration and incentivize the integration. And at the moment, we're forcing integration. And that is why we're getting to so much conflict.
It's amazing still that there's the power of individuals or a small group of people that can have such an impact on the volatility in that respect.
But I think partially that's also media's problem, right? The media plays up. They like to have icons. They like to have, the battle of the titans. It's like one, it's always got to be two. You can't just have one. You need two duking it out against each other. And social media is no different. I put that in the same bucket, right? Look at all the clickbait we get on the YouTube channels and all the podcasts, so that everybody, the world's coolest dictator, the world, this is, I lost $1 million. It's like, you got all this clickbait, and it's just like, guys, just to get eyeballs. And in fact, it's not really about eyeballs. It's about the quality. And I don't know, we've lost the ability to measure quality and appreciate the measurement in quality over quantity. It's always numbers. I got to have 1 million. I got to have 100 million. And it's just like, but if you're in China in a population of 1.3 billion, it's like, 10,000 is nothing. But if you're in Switzerland where the population is 6 million, 10,000 is huge, right? It's like all a level. But actually, I have 10,000 of the world's leading economists inside the Truflation Twitter network of 120,000. Ooh. How do you quantify that? How do you value that? And how do you give appreciation to that? Because somebody's just going to come in, look, 120,000, that should be 10 million. I'm not interested if it's only 120,000. Move on, next, right? And so we have to change the values, and that takes years, right? Look at the one example somebody was telling me about was drink driving, right? I mean, it's taken 40 years to get drink drive, You look at my parents. I remember, I'm drinking, I'm driving, I don't care. I'll dodge the police. I'll go on sidewinding roads. I come along. It's like, I've had maybe 1 or 2 drinks, and when I shouldn't be driving. But I've always tried to stay. And the kids, for them, it's, you're having a drink, you can't drive, right? It's like immediately. So that generational change has happened, and I think we'll see the same with climate control, right? It's like, our generation growing up maybe wasn't so and isn't so conscious about it. I'm still going to have a ICE engine, right? I've got an electric. And then any child coming to the market today is going to buy an electric car. Why? Because they just want to protect the environment. And so I think it's a generational thing. It takes 20 to 30 years to filter into the system. And that education, just takes time to sink in. And as we see that come in, I think we will be in a better place tomorrow as well. And that will happen across a whole bunch of climate areas and other areas that we're seeing.
We just have to change the perception that the younger generation have that, oh, how many people liked my post? Because that's the problem, is that it is really about that, and that's driving everything, right? That's what falsifies the numbers, because they're only interested in how many reactions did I actually get and why didn't I get a reaction to this? And that feeds through into so many elements of business and things as you go on.
How do we do that? I think that's a really good observation, Anthony. I mean, really, everybody's now going to the end of the world, and all they care about is they don't care about the environment and what they're doing and their experience associated with the environment, but all they care about is having a picture of them jumping off a cliff or in front of a beautiful lake, and then posting that and hoping they get 27 likes. Or what?
And it's so false, right? Because you sit there and you go, Jemma, I'm sure you've experienced this as well, right? You take the photo, but what you don't know is what's happening immediately before it, where you're screaming at the kids, come into the photo. We just want this one photo so we can share it with the family. And 2 seconds after the photo, the kids have run off in different directions. And the happy photo is not the reality of what's there either. And so the whole thing is just an unreal set of circumstances. And I think we need to find a way to educate. I don't know what the answer is, but we need to find a way to educate the children, because what they're learning from social media is not healthy.
And maybe it's also down to the element where we always like to compare ourselves to others, right? And I think that need for us to compare ourselves is good because it helps move society forward and builds this competitive environment. It is also very unhealthy because you're always unhappy, because you're always being deprived of something that somebody else has that you're comparing yourself to that you don't have, right? The happy family. But actually, in reality, it's not necessarily a happy family, right? So in order to be happy, we should not compare ourselves to others and just focus on our vision and our mission and what we think we can do best.
Connecting with purpose is where the secret lies, somewhere in there, and focusing more on that than the things you can't control, what other people think. That's where you've got to find that balance in there, because otherwise you're going to have these complete volatility and these emotional reactions that are going to be based on things that are not real, that are just going to continue to follow through.
And that's why I think, what we're trying to do with building a new system to calculate the performance of an economy and manage and maintain the sentiment in the community and the analysis of inflation. And I think equally what you're doing, right? Coming back to your point, Jemma, where you were talking about AI consuming a huge amount of energy. I think what you're trying to do is really track the energy and enable the efficient distribution of new energy sources, right? And how to track that. Because I really believe with AI growing, and it's going to grow, and there's the genie's out of the bottle. It's not going to stop. And I think the economies that build new efficient data centers, the economies that build sufficient energy supply to feed the AI beast, are going to grow the fastest. And where is that energy going to come from? Where is the new efficient data centers going to be coming from? And how do I leverage the existing resources that we have to not just deplete the planet, but to actually harness the existing assets that the planet has to convert that to energy, and trading that, building that, identifying where that comes from, and will generate new opportunities and be a big part of the future.
Well, if I look at the level of acceptance around AI in terms of like how much it's being used, how much it's going to be used, notwithstanding the amount of energy it already consumes and is going to, it dwarfs the amount of energy that blockchain technology uses. But blockchain technology and energy, in terms of the public discourse, was extremely unacceptable that it should use that much energy. However, with AI, it seems like it's acceptable. And I've been asking myself, why is that? And it kind of ties with some of the earlier things we've been discussing here, is that I think blockchain is around democratization and empowerment of citizens. Not in all instances. I think there are some which can lead to more centralized concentration of power. But in many cases, it's about democratization and empowerment of citizens. Whereas I think AI can be used as a tool, centralized AI can be used as a tool to control people's thoughts and, in more nefarious uses. And I think
Yeah.
that is seen as a very powerful tool. And so the energy associated with using that is deemed to be much more acceptable.
Yeah, but I think the narrative will shift really quickly, because when you see the growth in energy production in China over the rest of the world, will all of the AI data centers and the AI compute capacity sitting in China, will that matter more from a centralized perspective versus in Europe, where they're hugely dependent on Russian gas and Russian oil? I'm just assuming that the growth projections in China are significantly larger, and the investment going into energy development is far greater than in any other part of the world.
Well, I think that the climate conversation, or even just source of energy, is a big part of that tension as well. You've seen like Google in its latest annual report, I think, said energy production had gone up like 50%, and was predicted to continue to rise. And they've basically walked back from their commitments to be carbon neutral. And Microsoft didn't say it quite like that, but said that they're just going to focus on like internal energy efficiency projects, and it's unclear how they could meet those carbon commitments. But I think, there's two topics there. There's kind of carbon, but if you, which I think, there's a lot around that. But if you just look at energy, type of energy, where companies are saying we want to source our energy from renewable sources, then it will be very difficult for them to operate the AI with that alone. And what China has done, China is like not squeamish at all about whatever type of energy source it's got. Whereas, European countries are far more prescriptive around that. And so that is going to create a supply squeeze, a price squeeze, undoubtedly. So you're going to get lower cost energy in different places that are going to be able to power these engines. So I think what I'm trying to say to answer your question is like, what's that going to mean in terms of like geopolitically, where the center of power it might be around some of these? I think it will be in the places where there's low cost energy, undoubtedly.
Yeah. I mean, I can't remember which one, but there was wasn't one of the sort of tech companies, they were going to go build out their own power plant or something like that. They were going to invest in actually a power plant to meet their energy requirements.
Yes.
Directly. Yeah.
Well, a lot of the tech companies have done that. They've basically entered into long-term power purchase agreements, offtake agreements with generation assets, whether they're solar, wind, nuclear as well. So I think that is going to be like, to manage their own price risk, they're going to enter into long-term offtake agreements, so they've got predictable power supply at predictable prices to feed the engines. And, as Bitcoin mining kind of draws to an end, you're seeing a lot of the miners now look at offering compute to the AI industry as a kind of pivot for their activities, which I think is quite interesting, where they're thinking about new ways to actually utilize a lot of their assets, or setting up data centers for those purposes as well, because there's a lot of similarities in terms of how you operate those businesses. So I think that's going to be quite relevant as well. I just wanted to touch on the comment you were making about comparison and how do we support our children around this. And I thought, there's so many things in today's world where children and we can all compare ourselves, and it's not always helpful. And I don't know if you'd heard Brené Brown's definition of comparison, which is it's the crush of conformity from one side and competition from the other. And I was going to ask you, Stefan, with your kids, like what do you do to help re-regulate them or create a more productive perspective around those kinds of things?
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, I don't know. There's a great move, keeping up with the Joneses, right? So you have that competition. Like you said, right? On the one hand, you want to compete. And then on the other hand, you want to be conformist, right? So either way, I think in the conformist, you're killing creativity. In the competition, you're harnessing creativity, but you're creating frameworks in the competition that, again, is restricting your ability to be creative, right? I want you all to run with the same conditions, the same 100 meters under the same circumstances at the same time, regardless of what time is best for you and not for you. And did you sleep well today? Did you not? I don't know. It's just we try to create the same system for everybody else so that there's no room for creativity in that framework unless you're finding a new loophole that you can go out. How do I teach my children to deal with that? I don't know. I just think the way I teach them is to try and be proactive, right? That's all I can sort of say is try to anticipate what some of the and always offer up help, right? The only way is, how can I help? What can I do? I know, and just be creative in trying to solve the help versus trying to get more clarity and more guidance and more clarity and more guidance, so that you become a nuisance because you're not creative enough to pick up and help me. I have to actually go and do it all alongside you so that you can help me. And one thing is, the same problem will never come up again twice, right? Every problem, it's only a problem because it's new, right? Otherwise, there's not a problem. I just think spending time outdoors, the more experience you get, is where you learn the most. And you don't learn that behind a computer screen. I think you really just need to go travel, meet new people, meet different types of people, interact with those people. And if that's interacting when you're playing basketball together, if that's interacting by going to new cities together, or being, look at you, you've traveled all the way into Switzerland. I have to learn a new language, right? Your different sensors have to start kicking in. And that way you're connecting different strands in your brain. And all of a sudden your brain goes from 450 billion parameters to 800 billion parameters. And so I think the connected tissue in your brain, how do you wake that up? And that's the way I see it, is really, travel, necessity, and interaction and experience, because experience brings out that emotion, and emotion, you learn with emotion more so than anything else. That creates more scars in us than anything else.
Yeah, undoubtedly.
Stefan, I was just going to take a final tact and say, I know we've got to wrap things up in a moment, otherwise we're going to talk for hours. But I'm just interested to know if you've got some tips for people who are new investors and things that are coming into the market. What's the advice you would give them?
Yeah, so look at things slightly longer term. So I don't go in, I'm not going to give you advice today, sell tomorrow type thing. For me, it's really over the longer term. I mean, I really believe in, ultimately, I'm super committed to the blockchain environment. So people that are building around the blockchain, I think, is going to be a good investment. And I think investing in blockchains that have actions and interactions, right? That's really what you got to look for. Number one. Number two is, I believe energy. We're going to need energy. We're going to need to source this new energy. I think energy is a big area in the future. AI, obviously, I think AI is going to be a big requirement. And then commodities, right? All the commodities that we need to stay alive on the planet, to build things, to work with, to generate energy, to transmit energy, to transform energy, and to power energy. All of those commodities along the way are an essential part of the longer term requirements that we have. And that's where I am putting my investments. I mean, a lot more you can say around investments. It's on the one hand, if you don't have much money, start investing. Just no matter what, just start investing. I've told my kids to start now and continue to have a discipline. It's not, you can go to the gym once a month or once a year and you think, oh, I worked out really hard, but you're not going to develop very much. It's the consistency by doing the same thing every day, every month, every week, whatever it is, at a level, a cadence, and you need to keep at that. And so if you're going to get into investing, start investing today and do it every day, because that then compounds. It compounds in terms of a learning. It compounds in terms of value. It compounds in terms of all sorts of other things that come with it. And so, yeah, it's persistent is the name of the game. And that way you'll learn, that way you'll grow your investment. Even if it's with $10, if you put $10 aside every week, instead of going to buy that Starbucks coffee, Starbucks coffee today is $6. So save 2 coffees, make them yourself, and then go and invest that in whatever you think is, a Tesla stock or a Bitcoin or a fraction of a Bitcoin, and just do that every week. Yeah. And that's, and learn, is that the right thing to do? Learn about what is, if you're investing in Tesla, if you're investing in energy, if you're investing in commodity, why should I buy lithium? Why? Where's the supply of lithium? What's the difficulty in lithium? And then learn about it and then put $10 in it every day. And if you don't like it, make sure you diversify. So next time around, you don't put the $10 into that, put it into Tesla. And so but you're constantly learning, you're constantly investing, and your investment will compound over time alone to meet, inflation, right? Just alone, it will make up for that value.
Yeah, it's great, Stefan. I think what you're saying is learn about what you invest in. Don't just follow the crowd.
Definitely.
Stefan, I just have 2 short questions to ask you before we wrap up. The first one is, what is your favorite song?
Thunderstruck by AC/DC.
Australian.
Yeah,
I love it. Do you know that got me through many long nights at university with Thunderstruck playing in the studios.
And what about your favorite podcast?
That's a really difficult one. I listen to many podcasts. I do like, and they evolve, right? So over time, I think the podcasts change that I listen to. I used to like the big macro perspective of the All In podcast. I've now shifted. I really like the BG2 podcast. That's a lot of data in there. And yeah, those are the ones I listen to. And then I love, during the Tour de France, I listen to the We Do podcast, which is about cycling. It's Lance Armstrong's podcast on every stage of the tour. I mean, there's too much advertising in there. If they'd cut that out, that'd be much nicer, but I get it. They have to pay for their time and their effort and their research that they do into this. But yeah, those are, and then I'm sort of got into, there's this advertising guy called Rory Sutherland. I don't know, Rory Sutherland or Sunderland. Anyway, yeah. So he's really interesting in terms of looking at things from a very different perspective, right? Not the metric and analytical perspective, but more the emotional side and how to create trust and things like that. So I sort of like a lot of those themes at the moment.
Look, I just wanted to just say in the end, you've given lots of great advice on things. Give me one prediction for what you think is going to happen in the next 6 months.
We'll have a new president in the US.
Not prepared to say which one, though.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I go back and forth. I hope we have a strong leader. And unfortunately, I think the choice of 2 candidates to run literally the world is very, very limiting. And I don't think Kamala is a strong leader for the world. And I think the world needs a strong leader right now. That will be my statement there. Otherwise, in the next 6 months, Jesus. Look, I think Yeah, I don't know. I'm super excited. I hope, I really think that after September, we should come back to a stronger market environment. Everybody's coming back from holidays. Hopefully the Fed will reduce interest rates and we'll be in an environment where we need to create a framework that is going to allow prosperity, allow innovation, and create a framework that is not damning entrepreneurs, that is rewarding for entrepreneurs, that is not hindering entrepreneurs with compliance and legal and framework. And let's not have lawyers and accountants rule the world, but let's have entrepreneurs and creatives help grow a new environment that generates prosperity and ubiquitous wealth.
Very nice. Very elegantly put. Stefan, there's been so much in this conversation and we could have talked for a lot longer. I really appreciate you making the time. What I've taken away from our conversation is that a lot of what you're working on is filtering what's real and not real. And that's a theme more broadly, I think, that we need more of. And there's nothing consistent in the world, and we need to come to terms with variation and volatility. And it's what makes life rich and markets rich. And crypto markets adjust themselves a lot faster. So we're not seeing the magnitude of corrections by the traditional finance. We learned about carry trades in Japan. We're going to have more prediction markets emerging, and the existing system is really creaking at the seams. And that you created your company, Truflation, because you saw there was a gap there around data and that inflation really isn't transitory. And we talked about the purpose of humans in an AI world, and obviously that needs further discussion. We can talk about that in the future. I think in summary, it's about thinking long-term. You mentioned getting out in nature and doing something consistently with cadence to really develop skills and mastery around things in the world and be a contribution and feel empowered. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. And enjoyed this. And I think, there's so much we can talk about, and thank you for having me.
That's all for this episode of UnBlock'd. Please check out the show notes for information on Power Ledger and other contact information. We welcome your comments and feedback, and please hit subscribe wherever you are listening. This podcast was produced by Podcast Done For You. We look forward to your company next time on UnBlock'd.